Everyone. Today I'm taking a departure from the usual topics that I tend to cover here. Usually I cover the origins of Islam, but today I'm taking something that's dear to my heart. And a priest at my parish mentioned that, any lay person who has got any capability of responding to a recent declaration by the Vatican, they're to do so in whatever way they can. And he mentioned that, not many people are on TV or radio or whatever, but in whatever manner that is available to you in your personal life, you have to do something. So this is my personal response to Fiducia Supplicans. Now, what is Fiducia Supplicans? I'm going to be going into a little bit more detail later, but essentially it is a document that allows for same-sex blessings or blessings to those in irregular relationships. There's an awful lot of misinformation going around. There are a lot of people who misread documents, who don't read it carefully enough, and imagine things in the text that are not there, and don't see things that are actually there. So I thought I will use the skills that I have, which are limited enough, but at least I know how to analyze text to some extent, and give my personal response and try and add a bit of light and clarity to this tricky question. So I'm going to start with the principle of non-contradiction. In logic, the principle of non-contradiction states that contradictory propositions cannot both be true in the same sense at the same time. Example, the two propositions P is the case and P is not the case are mutually exclusive. So that's going to be really important, because when you're talking about doctrine and theology, people can be quite ambiguous with the way they say things. But even if they are being ambiguous, logic allows us to clearly see if there's contradictions. We can't have contradictions in terms of statements. That allows us to kind of stay close to the truth and identify errors as well. So the context of this, I believe, is a growing heresy within the church, which is called Modernism. There was an encyclical released by Pope Pius X on the doctrines of the modernists, Pascendi Dominici Gregis, and it was published the 8th of September 1907. So we're talking about over 110 years ago. And it is even more relevant than it was then. It is a very prophetic document in many ways. And this is part of the Magisterium. It's basically identifying a heresy that Catholics are meant to avoid. And this has not been rescinded in any way. It's part of the Magisterium. It's part of the teaching of the Church. Okay, and I think it is a very good guide for us in this day and age. So I'm going to be giving you a few relevant quotes here just to get the most important aspects of this. In paragraph 26, it says, "To finish with this whole question of faith and its shoots, it remains to be seen, venerable brethren, what the modernists have to say about their development. First of all, they lay down the general principle that in a living religion everything is subject to change and must change, and in this way they pass to what may be said to be among the chief of their doctrines, that of evolution. To the laws of evolution everything is subject: dogma, church, worship, the books we revere as sacred, even faith itself, and the penalty of disobedience is death." So this comes on the heels of Charles Darwin and the great interest in evolution. Modernism is kind of an offshoot, in a sense, and applies the idea of evolution to everything, including faith. And not only is it saying that that a living religion is subject to change, it also must change. Okay. So it expects change. It expects change, which is often called progress. Whether that is genuinely progress or not is another question. Okay. The problem with that is, for 2,000 years, Catholics have been taught that the deposit of faith and morals is something received, and the church is a steward of that deposit of faith, and it's there to look after it, not to change it in any way, not to take one iota from it, but simply to preserve it and pass it on. And so you can see how modernism is a very dangerous idea that goes against all of that. So he goes on to say, the chief stimulus of evolution in the domain of worship consists in the need of adapting itself to the uses and customs of peoples, as well as the need of availing itself of the value which certain acts have acquired by long usage. Finally, evolution in the church itself is fed by the need of accommodating itself to historical conditions and of harmonizing itself with existing forms of society. Such is religious evolution in detail. What that means in practice is essentially the church develops an inferiority complex where it must change to fit with society. Instead of actually leading society, it's following society. And that's the problem. And we see this every day in the church. Paragraph 27. Hence, studying more closely the ideas of the modernists, evolution is described as resulting from the conflict of two forces, one of them tending towards progress, the other towards conservation. The conserving force in the church is tradition, and tradition is represented by religious authority, and this both by right and in fact. For by right it is in the very nature of authority to protect tradition, and in fact, for authority, raised as it is above the contingencies of life, feels hardly, or not at all, the spurs of progress. The progressive force, on the contrary, which responds to the inner needs, lies in the individual consciences and ferments there, especially in such of them as are in most intimate contact with life. Now it is by a species of compromise between the forces of conservation and of progress, that is to say, between authority and individual consciences, that changes and advances take place. Now there's a strange idea afoot in the church nowadays, where the church has kind of been split into two camps. One is on the side of conservation or tradition, the other is on the side of progress or supposed progress. But actually the purpose of the church is to maintain the tradition. The idea of changing that tradition is not part of the tradition itself. This is something new, it's a novelty. And note here that modernists try to justify contradictions. So paragraph 36, do they stop here? No, indeed, for they are ready to admit, nay, to proclaim that Christ himself manifestly erred in determining the time when the coming of the kingdom of God was to take place. And they tell us that we must not be surprised at this, since even Christ was subject to the laws of life. After this, what is to become of the dogmas of the church? The dogmas brim over with flagrant contradictions. But what matter that, since, apart from the fact that vital logic accepts them, they are not repugnant to symbolic truth? Are we not dealing with the infinite, and has not the infinite an infinite variety of aspects? In short, to maintain and defend these theories, they do not hesitate to declare that the noblest homage that can be paid to the infinite is to make it the object of contradictory propositions. But when they justify even contradiction, what is it that they will refuse to justify? So in other words, modernists have no shame in openly contradicting themselves, because they just view it as a palette of infinite choices that they can pick and choose as it suits them. Paragraph 42. They exercise all their ingenuity in diminishing the force and falsifying the character of tradition, so as to rob it of all its weight. But for Catholics, the Second Council of Nicaea will always have the force of law, where it condemns those who dare, after the fashion of heretics, to deride the ecclesiastical traditions, to invent novelties of some kind, or endeavour by malice or craft to overthrow any one of the legitimate traditions of the Catholic Church. Let that sink in. And Catholics will hold for law also the profession of the Fourth Council of Constantinople. We therefore profess to conserve and guard the rules bequeathed to the Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church by the holy and most illustrious apostles, by the Orthodox councils, both general and local, and by every one of those divine interpreters, the fathers and doctors of the Church. So, clearly, Pius X was warning of the danger of a pernicious heresy called Modernism that was endeavouring to change everything. The doctrine of the Church, the faith of the Church, the practice of the Church, the structure of the Church, the Bible itself, the prayers of the Church, the sacramentals of the Church, the liturgy of the Church, everything. Nothing was free from their desire to change things. Okay? Now, one bishop that stands out in opposition to all of this is Bishop Athanasius Schneider. I was recently at a conference and I was able to submit a question to Bishop Schneider as regards magisterial teaching and ambiguity. His answer included the following: a magisterium to speak ambiguously is contrary to the nature of the Church necessarily. So what's he saying there is, it is the nature of the magisterium to speak clearly. The moment that a statement is not clear is the moment it's not magisterial. So it doesn't matter who's saying it. If a bishop, archbishop, pope, if they are speaking in a way that's ambiguous, it's by default, it's no longer magisterial. But yet there are a lot of people who think because of the role a person plays that a teaching can still be considered magisterial when it's ambiguous. It's not possible, because you can't offer an assent of faith to a proposition which is ambiguous. The proposition, first of all, has to be clear before you can offer an assent of faith, and that is really the tradition of the Church for the last 2,000 years. Christianity is not a fideistic religion. It's not one where you believe in things regardless of whether they are unreasonable or contradictory. They're meant to be reasonable because they're connected to the Logos, which is Jesus himself. Okay, so I'm going to play you a video that I recorded where Bishop Schneider is answering this question.
And related to this are some of the Vatican Council, the Second Vatican Council documents sufficiently clear, or do they need to be clarified by a future Pope?
A magisterium to speak ambiguous is contrary to the nature of church magisterium. Our Lord said to the apostles, your yes is yes and your no is no. You cannot say something Jesus Christ never taught ambiguous, and the apostles. And so for ambiguity no one will give his life. And yes, there are unfortunately in the text of the Second Vatican Council some statements which are obviously ambiguous. And this had to be corrected in the future. Yes, but they are not infallible teaching. They are not meant to be infallible teaching. The Second Vatican Council proposedly renounced to speak in an infallible way, thanks be to God. And so it's only in a pastoral way. So this is no problem that in the future can be modified and corrected.
really important to nail down our definitions before we proceed. One of the classic ways that modernists muddy the water is by playing around with definitions, and they use synonyms to avoid the principle of non-contradiction. Just change the word, and you no longer have a contradiction. But that's just sneaky behavior. It's not actually getting away from the fact that there's a contradiction, whether you use a synonym or not. But in any case, here are some of the definitions. So union means the state of being united, and we can use many synonyms for that. Legitimize means to make something legal or acceptable. So to legitimize something would be to make it socially acceptable, for example. Couple. Okay, so in terms of it as a noun, two of the same sort considered together, or a pair. Two persons considered as joined together, as a married or engaged pair, lovers or dance partners. As a verb, used with an object to fasten, link, or associate together in a pair or pairs to join, connect. And a verb used without an object to join in a pair, unite, to copulate. Okay? Now, if we compare union with couple, they are synonyms. Okay? And to deny that would be just an act of sophistry. Okay? So they're clearly the same thing. Alright? Essentially, a union is a synonym for couple and vice versa. Now, this leads us to the Responsum of the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, CDF, to a dubium regarding the blessing of the unions of persons of the same sex. And this is dated the 15th of March 2021. It's really clear. There's an explanation that follows, but it's really clear in terms of its response to the question proposed. Does the Church have the power to give the blessing to unions of persons of the same sex? And the response is negative. No. Okay. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means for Catholics, whether they are laity, priests, bishops, whoever, they do not have the power to do blessings of a same-sex couple. Okay? And to go against that would be to go against the Magisterium, because this is definitely clear. It's not ambiguous in any way. Okay? And this was issued on behalf of Pope Francis. Now, it goes into an explanation. I'm going to take some relevant parts of this. It says, for this reason, it is not licit to impart a blessing on relationships or partnerships, even stable, that involve sexual activity outside of marriage, i.e. outside the indissoluble union of a man and a woman, open in itself to the transmission of life, as is the case of the unions between persons of the same sex. So the document is offering multiple synonyms there for unions, like relationships, partnerships. The one they didn't mention is couples, but essentially the couples could have easily been put in there as well as another synonym for the same thing. Okay? Goes on to say, consequently, in order to conform with the nature of sacramentals, when a blessing is invoked on particular human relationships, in addition to the right intention of those who participate, it is necessary that what is blessed be objectively and positively ordered to receive and express grace, according to the designs of God inscribed in creation and fully revealed by Christ the Lord. And here note that a right intention and the relationship must be objectively and positively ordered. Okay? Those two things are needed. Okay? In order for a blessing to happen. We're not talking about blessing for individuals here. We're talking about it's a blessing on their relationship. It's a blessing on the fact of there being a union, a couple, a partnership. And if that partnership or union or couple is not fitting with the objective designs of God inscribed in creation, then that blessing cannot happen. That's what it's explaining there. Then it goes on to say the following. The answer to the proposed union does not preclude the blessings given to individual persons with homosexual inclinations, who manifest the will to live in fidelity to the revealed plans of God as proposed by church teaching. Rather, it declares illicit any form of blessing that tends to acknowledge their unions as such. Okay, so it's really clear. If a gay person asks a priest for a blessing, no problem. They're not blessing their relationship or anything like that. They're blessing the person there. As soon as it becomes a question of a blessing on a couple, that's a different matter, because it's a blessing on the nature of the relationship itself. It goes on to say, in this case, in fact, the blessing would manifest not the intention to entrust such individual persons to the protection and help of God, in the sense mentioned above, but to approve and encourage a choice and a way of life that cannot be recognized as objectively ordered to the revealed plans of God. So note any form of blessing that tends to acknowledge their unions as such. Okay, so that's pretty clear. There's no leeway. There's no wriggle room. No nothing. It's just a further explanation for why they give a declaration of negative. It's not possible to give a blessing to same-sex couples or to those living in irregular relationships. Okay. So that was written by Louis Cardinal Ladaria in 2021, so 2 years ago. In May of 2023, he said that the truth about the human person and sexuality does not change, even as prevailing ideology exalts freedom without relation to truth. Alright, so he's kind of reaffirming what was in the 2021 document, that things don't change when it comes to the human person and sexuality. Alright, so what happened as a result? Well, the Vatican was pretty swift to get rid of him, as we'll see. Pope Francis, 86, with fellow Argentine Archbishop Victor Fernandez, 60, 26 years younger, together at the Vatican on June the 30th. So this is literally the following month, just before Francis announced on July 1st that he had chosen Fernandez to head the Church's top doctrinal office, the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. In other words, he has kicked out the other guy and replaced him with Fernandez. So on the 1st of July, Pope Francis thanked Ladaria for his service as prefect, announcing that his mandate was concluded and naming Archbishop Victor Manuel Fernandez to succeed him. That's him there. So who is this Fernandez guy? Well, Fernandez is famous or infamous for his book Heal Me With Your Mouth. This is the person that was chosen by Francis to lead the congregation for the faith. Here's an excerpt from his book. Come down, my dear, before you awaken suddenly, someone desperate with a terrible hickey. How was God so cruel as to give you that mouth? There is no one who resists me, bitch. Hide it. That's who was chosen, okay, to head the Church's top doctrinal office, the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. So, we move on to Fiducia Supplicans, who was written by Fernandez. Okay. It was published on the 18th of December 2023. He met with Francis the day before. Like with many recent documents from the Vatican, the word Pope is not put next to Francis, so he's just Francis. Not even Bishop of Rome, just Francis. By his personal choice. Now, in the preface, it says, it is precisely in this context that one can understand the possibility of blessing couples in irregular situations and same-sex couples without officially validating their status or changing in any way the Church's perennial teaching. This is a change from negative to possibility. Okay, so there was no scope for possibility in that last document. Let's remind ourselves again. This is the Responsum of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, 2021. Does the Church have the power to give the blessing to unions of persons of the same sex? Response is negative. Here it has gone from negative to maybe. Okay. Let's look at paragraph 4. It is a matter of avoiding that something that is not marriage is being recognized as marriage. Therefore, rites and prayers that could create confusion between what constitutes marriage, which is the exclusive, stable, and indissoluble union between a man and a woman, naturally open to the generation of children, and what contradicts it, are inadmissible. Now, this fools an awful lot of Catholics reading it because it sounds lovely. It doesn't sound like it's doing anything crazy. But note, it is not saying blessings of same-sex couples is not allowed, or are not allowed. Just don't make it look like it is recognised as a marriage, which is totally subjective and a typical modernist approach to reality. Subjectivism, situation ethics, these are all the tools of modernism. It has created an opening by which a blessing could be imparted as long as one has made some attempt to make it not look like it is being treated like a marriage. So this is a contradiction of the 2021 declaration because it is the duty of the CDF not to give unclear teaching that leaves wriggle room for defined previous magisterial teaching. Ambiguity is by definition not magisterial teaching. So this document, by the very nature of the fact that it's ambiguous, is not magisterial teaching. The previous one said it's not allowed. Here it's saying, well, it's a maybe, it's possible. It's saying just as long as it doesn't look like a marriage. How do you bless two people side by side and not make it look that like it is a ritual, like a blessing for a civil union or a marriage or something to that effect? It's just not possible. So it's a cop-out. It's a red herring that's been thrown to confuse people. Look at paragraph 5. For this reason, when it comes to blessings, the Church has the right and duty to avoid any rite that might contradict this conviction or lead to confusion. It sounds like it's saying no, doesn't it? But notice the word rite. Avoid any rite that might contradict this conviction. Such is also the meaning of the Responsum of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which states the Church does not have the power to impart blessings on unions of persons of the same rite. So what it's doing, it's reframing the Responsum by saying that it was only talking about rights. Okay? So note that as long as it isn't a right, you're good to go. But the official CDF actually said no blessing, period. So what we have here, and this is quite shocking, this is essentially a lie, a misrepresentation of what the CDF intended clearly and earlier in 2021. Okay? It was not just simply saying a rite or a liturgical function or anything like that. It's basically saying any blessing on a couple is not allowed. Okay. Paragraph 6. This fact allows us to highlight the risk of confusing a blessing given to any other union with the rite that is proper to the sacrament of marriage. Another red herring being introduced again. Note, however, it immediately introduces a new type of blessing to get around the roadblock to avoid the confusion. This is doublespeak of the 1984 kind. What is really important in the world of doublespeak is the ability to lie, whether knowingly or unconsciously, to get away with it, and the ability to use lies and choose and shape facts selectively, blocking out those that don't fit an agenda or program. See, straight after this, it starts introducing other types of blessing to try and get around the problem. Paragraph 8. Blessings are among the most widespread and evolving sacramentals. Notice the modernist term there, evolving sacramentals. Note that this is an actual bona fide modernist heresy. Sacramentals can't evolve. Doctrine and practice are linked. Changing sacramentals by definition means changing the doctrine underpinning them. There's no way around it. Okay. Paragraph 9. From a strictly liturgical point of view, a blessing requires that what is blessed to be conformed to God's will as expressed in the teachings of the Church. Again, this sounds perfectly fine if you're not paying close attention to the legalese in the text. Note, it's more modernist mumbo-jumbo. Why does it say strictly? To lessen it. The Pope rails against rigidity, so the signal given here is that a non-strict view is allowable, that a blessing doesn't need to be conformed to God's will. This is not just wrong, but blasphemous. And it also says liturgical point of view. So why liturgical view? To imply the possibility of other views, such as a modernist point of view or a humanist point of view or any other point of view that you'd like to mention. Okay, it's creating a leeway.
You see what I did? You see what I did? Yeah. Got both of you. Prime time. Going. Yeah.
Nailed it.
Nailed it.
Paragraph 10. This is a liturgical understanding of blessings insofar as they are rites officially proposed by the Church. Note, it is implying that there is room where they are not rites, okay, and not officially proposed. So there's loads of room for blessings given there. All right. This would be kind of like saying, imagine you had an 18-year-old son. You give him a wad of money to go out for the night and says, now you're not allowed to drink any beer. Okay? Don't come back here having drunk beer. So what does the young lad do? He goes out and buys whiskey or vodka or anything other than beer because they have specified, beer is not allowed. Okay? Same thing is happening here. Okay? They're narrowing it down on purpose. This is not accidental. It's narrowed down on purpose to allow plenty of legroom to introduce blessings. Paragraph 11. Basing itself on these considerations, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith's explanatory note to its 2021 Responsum recalls that when a blessing is invoked on certain human relationships by a special liturgical rite, notice liturgical rite, it is necessary that what is blessed corresponds with God's designs written in creation and fully revealed by Christ the Lord. For this reason, since the Church has always considered only those sexual relations that are lived out within marriage to be morally licit, the Church does not have the power to confer its liturgical blessing when that would somehow offer a form of moral legitimacy to a union that presumes to be a marriage or to an extramarital sexual practice. Notice the adjectives liturgical there is narrowing things down. So the problem is not with blessing same-sex relationships. The problem is done in a liturgical rite. Okay? Note that it looks perfectly orthodox, but spot the adjective liturgical before blessing. It is intentionally framing it around liturgical blessings, a subset of blessings to get around it. It is crafty. Okay? Notice what happens next. I've just mentioned here that this is a subset. Paragraph 12, it's straight into widening the set of possibilities. It says, one must also avoid the risk of reducing the meaning of blessings to this point of view alone, for it would lead us to expect the same moral conditions for a simple blessing that are called for in the reception of the sacraments. Such a risk requires that we broaden this perspective further. Indeed, there is the danger that a pastoral gesture that is so beloved and widespread will be subjected to too many moral prerequisites, which under the claim of control could overshadow the unconditional power of God's love that forms the basis for the gesture of blessing. Note, it has immediately created a larger set of blessings to which liturgical blessings are just a narrow part. So I'll give this 10 out of 10 for craftiness. And I'm sure this went over the head of most Catholics who read it. Paragraph 13 is a classic example of gaslighting. When you can't win the argument, you have to issue an ad hominem against those who disagree, make them appear to be the crazy ones for applying logic. Okay, it says, paragraph 13, precisely in this regard, Pope Francis urges not to lose pastoral charity, which should permeate all our decisions and attitudes, and to avoid being judges who only deny, reject, and exclude. Let us then respond to the Holy Father's proposal by developing a broader understanding of blessings. Note, those who resist this novelty is being gaslighted as unchargeable. So by this definition, Pope Pius X has been thrown under the bus. He doesn't have pastoral charity. What greater pastoral charity is there than to do what is necessary to save a person's soul, and others for that matter? That's the greatest charity that can be given. Yeah? So don't be fooled by that. Paragraph 24. Indeed, the language, rhythm, course, and theological emphasis of popular piety differ from those of the corresponding liturgical action. For this reason, pious practices must conserve their proper style, simplicity, and language, and attempts to impose forms of liturgical celebration on them are always to be avoided. Note that the blessings are recast as popular piety, inverted comma. Now we've created a different category. Again, what's the purpose? To give themselves leeway, wriggle room, leg room for the new blessings. Of course, the modernist strategy here could be described as bait and switch, to get the laity to agree to what they perceive to be a minor change, and then they gradually introduce more major change later. Paragraph 25. Thus, when people ask for a blessing, an exhaustive moral analysis should not be placed as a precondition for conferring it. For those seeking a blessing should not be required to have prior moral perfection. Note that this is fudging the issue. Individual blessings have always been given in this way, but here a type of relationship is being blessed, which is different. Okay? So there was never an attempt to determine someone's level of moral perfection before a blessing, when it was an individual one, but now when a person is presenting him or herself in a couple situation, that's a different situation. Paragraph 27. So we are more important to God than all the sins we can commit, because He is Father, He is Mother, He is pure love, He has blessed us forever. God is Father. Referring to God as Mother is a pagan conception of God. The fact that they're using this weird mixing of genders, He is Mother, it also is like a nod to transgenderism as well. So that's problematic. Paragraph 31. Within the horizon outlined here appears the possibility of blessings for couples in irregular situations. Again, notice the possibility has been introduced. And for couples of the same sex, the form of which should not be fixed ritually by ecclesiastical authorities to avoid producing confusion with the blessing proper to the sacrament of marriage. I wonder, is it to avoid producing confusion or to avoid producing resistance? That might be clearer in terms of what's in their minds here. In such cases, a blessing may be imparted that not only has an ascending value, but also involves the invocation of a blessing that descends from God. Note that this is a direct contradiction of an earlier magisterial teaching that such blessings may not be given. Note that this is a direct contradiction of an earlier magisterial teaching that such blessings may not be given. There is no room for saying there is a possibility. This is false and wrong. Paragraph 36. In this sense, it is essential to grasp the Holy Father's concern that these non-ritualized blessings never cease being simple gestures to provide an effective means of increasing trust in God on the part of the people who ask for them. Careful that they should not become a liturgical or semi-liturgical act similar to a sacrament. How are they going to keep that door shut? Once they've Once they have granted the principle, the rest will follow as night follows day. It goes on to say, indeed, such a ritualization would constitute a serious impoverishment because it would subject a gesture of great value in popular piety to excessive control, depriving ministers of freedom and spontaneity in their pastoral accompaniment of people's lives. Note, this is classic modernism, creating change by baby steps. Once the principle is conceded, the rest will follow. Okay, don't be fooled, people, by this. Paragraph 37. In this regard, there come to mind the following words of the Holy Father, already quoted in part. Decisions that may be part of pastoral prudence in certain circumstances should not necessarily become a norm. That is to say, it is not appropriate for a diocese, a bishop's conference, or any other ecclesiastical structure to constantly and officially establish procedures or rituals for all kinds of matters. Canon law should not and cannot cover everything, nor should the episcopal conferences claim to do so with their various documents and protocols, since the life of the Church flows through many channels besides the normative ones. Thus, Pope Francis recalled that what is part of a practical discernment in particular circumstances cannot be elevated to the level of a rule, because this would lead to an intolerable casuistry. Note that the Pope is telling fellow church leaders to look the other way and not lead on such an important issue in the church. No rules, please, people. Okay, that's obviously just to let the thing go through without any resistance. But if there's no rules, let's look back to the earlier one. So here you have. So here you have the church saying, don't impose any rules or regulations and so forth. But here it's basically saying, but be careful that they should not become a liturgical or semi-liturgical act similar to sacrament. But how is that meant to happen when there was no rules? So they're basically tearing up the rule book, and yet they're saying, but they should be careful that this doesn't become a liturgical or semi-liturgical act. Well, obviously, if there's no rules in place, it will be. Just a matter of time. This is the equivalent of saying we're going to keep the horse in the stable, but we're going to keep the stable door open. See the contradiction? So don't worry, we're not going to introduce any liturgical rites, but we're not also going to have any rules around any of this. Now, paragraph 38. For this reason, one should neither provide for nor promote a ritual for the blessings of couples in an irregular situation. Okay. At the same time, one should not prevent or prohibit the Church's closeness to people in every situation in which they might seek God's help through a simple blessing. In a brief prayer preceding this spontaneous blessing, the ordained minister could ask that the individuals have peace, health, a spirit of patience, dialogue, and mutual assistance, but also God's light and strength to be able to fulfill His will completely. Well, they're not even fulfilling His will in the fact that they're in that form of relationship. So how can it go from that to completely? Note, it is clearly stating blessings of same-sex couples can be given in contradiction to the 2021 declaration. Okay, it's splitting hairs about whether it's a right or not. That's just a red herring to distract people from actually what's happening. Paragraph 39 is clearly saying how the blessing can be given. This is often misread as saying it can't be given, but that's a mistake. You need to read it carefully. It says, in any case, precisely to avoid any form of confusion or scandal, when the prayer of blessing is requested by a couple in an irregular situation, even though it is expressed outside the rites prescribed by the liturgical books, this blessing should never be imparted in concurrence with the ceremonies of a civil union, and not even in connection with them. Nor can it be performed with any clothing, gestures, or words that are proper to a wedding. The same applies when the blessing is requested by a same-sex couple. Note, it is saying, essentially, go ahead and bless them, just don't make it look like a wedding. This is the direct opposite to the 2021 declaration. Okay, and again, just remind ourselves, the principle of non-contradiction applies here. It's not possible that the 2021 and 2023 declarations are both magisterial statements because they directly contradict each other. So either the 2021 is not a magisterial document or the 2023 is not a magisterial document. You can't say that both of them are magisterial. Okay? It's just not possible. There's a clear, direct contradiction between the two. Now, this one I was going to suggest contains a clear lie is precisely to legitimize it. Okay. Paragraph 40. Such a blessing may indeed find its place in other contexts, such as a visit to a shrine, a meeting with a priest, prayer recited in a group, or during a pilgrimage. Indeed, through these blessings that are given, not through the ritual forms proper to the liturgy, but as an expression of the Church's maternal heart, similar to those that emanate from the core of popular piety. There is no intention to legitimize anything, but rather to open one's life to God, to ask for his help to live better, and also to invoke the Holy Spirit so that the values of the gospel may be lived with greater faithfulness. Note again, it is saying, go ahead and allow these blessings. In reality, legitimization will be unavoidable from this act. So this idea that there's no intention to legitimize anything, that's just nonsense. The ones that are rushing to make these blessings are the very ones who promote that legitimization on a regular basis. Paragraph 41. What has been said in this declaration regarding the blessings of same-sex couples is sufficient to guide the prudent and fatherly discernment of ordained ministers in this regard. Note, it has allowed same-sex blessings. And what could potentially happen next is that couples may apply to the Vatican for a papal blessing. You know, that big document which it bestows the papal blessing on a couple. That will be the next stage in this. Of course, that will cause scandal. It'll be on people's walls and so forth. Okay. Paragraph 45. In this way, every brother and every sister will be able to feel that in the Church they are always pilgrims, always beggars, always loved, and despite everything, always blessed. Note, despite asserting there is no intention to legitimize anything, paragraph 40, the document contradicts itself by the last line. Every brother and every sister will be able to feel that in the Church they are, despite everything, always blessed, which will be jumped upon as meaning being legitimized, being accepted. Okay, that's the definition of legitimized, that they are accepted as a couple. Okay, that's exactly what the blessing will offer. So that's it. That's my thoughts on this troublesome document. It's a worrying time in the Church. I do think this storm that's occurring in the Church will be a short-lived one. But for now, we have to resist what is clearly not in conformity with the Church's perennial and magisterial teaching. So thank you for watching, and see you all very soon. Bye-bye.